Hi, I'm Bobby Harrell with Strand Lighting as the Business Development Manager for Systems and Console Trainer. Today we're doing our NEO training class online. This is for entry-level training to get people started. So that's exactly what we'll do is get started. What I like to do to help people along is to explain how the console thinks, because the more you can understand the way the console thinks and what it's doing or trying to do, the more you can figure out how to do things on your own rather than just memorizing sequences and commands and button pushes and things like that. So we're going to start a little bit about terminology. This will actually get us into some interesting things about console history and the way they've thought along the lines, but I'll try and keep that to a minimum. So channels versus fixtures. These are completely interchangeable terms. There was a time when one would have a console that had channels that were typically your dimmer channels. Then on the same console you had a completely different numbering system for fixtures or attributed parameter devices like LEDs and moving lights, and you would have a channel 12 and the fixture 12. NEO does not think like that. It is just one numerical bucket, which is in your patch of how everything is set up to be controlled. So if you have a dimmer on 12, then that's going to be channel or fixture 12. If you've got a moving light or an LED on 25, then that's going to be a moving light or an LED. So it doesn't matter. NEO doesn't care. You don't have to put dimmer channels in one area and LEDs and movers in another, although a lot of programmers like to sort of separate them out that way. You can change every channel number, but those two terms are interchangeable. Fixtures generally came from the live event world, where channel that term generally came from the theatrical world. But it's all talking about a numerical control handle for the device. An attribute, that's going to be a fixture's parameter. And that will change the output of a fixture other than intensity. So this could be pan, tilt, zoom, red, gobo, cyan, magenta. All of those would be considered parameters or attributes. A cue is generally a recorded state that is played back in time. Normally cues are used for scripted environments like theatrical productions, plays, musicals, dance pieces, songs, right? Anything that has a flow to it and a follow-through. Cues are generally the best way to work. The beautiful thing about cues is they have a lot of different timing variables, so you can get very dynamic with the way lights change over one particular cue, or it can just be very simple. You just have time on the cue and you run it and it changes to that lighting state. A cue list. A cue list is a container for that list of cues. So you have the ability to have cues 1 through whatever number you want. Really, NEO's not really limited on that. And that can be in a cue list. Then you could create a second cue list and start over at Q1 with a whole nother set of cue numbers. I see multiple cue lists used lots of different ways. For a band, you could have a cue list per song. For a dance company, you could have a cue list per dance piece. They're probably used a lot more in architainment and architectural and museum environments, where each room in a museum could have its own cue list. So there are lots of different ways you can use cue lists. This is generally considered a more advanced feature, but I think as our industry advances, the multiple cue lists are used more and more and more. Groups. The definition of groups has changed a bit, and it continues to change as you go from one console to another, so I like to be very clear with this. A group is a collection of channels, their selection order, and their intensity levels. For any of you that might have been using Neo over the last few years, the definition of groups has changed. When it started out, a group was a collection of fixtures and all of their data, so it can include all parameter information. On our latest software, and it's a change we made 2 versions ago now, a group is just limited to being a collection of channels and their intensity, so it does not include parameter data. Some consoles just have it groups be a collection of fixtures. You don't really have to worry about the level information if that's the way you like to work. To not worry about level information, you can grab a group of channels, not give them a level, store them as a group, and that will work perfectly fine, regardless of whether you put them at full before you record the group or not. But since it does include that intensity information, if you put them at a level other than full and record your group, then that level will be stored in the group. So I would say the most traditional way to work with them would be either to not give them a level or to put them at full so you can see and confirm that that's the right fixtures you want, and then store your group from there. Submasters. Submasters are part of the group family, so it's all part of the bucket of information that falls into the category of groups. Just subs is sort of a subcategory or a subgroup, and this is going to store fixtures and all of their data and assign it to a slider. So if you grab a whole set of LEDs and movers, you put them in the position and a color and a gobo, and you store that to a sub, then when you go to play back that sub, it's going to contain all of that data that you stored. Preset. A preset is also a subgroup, and this is a fairly new item for Neo software, although the concept of groups of presets has been out for a while and exists in other platforms. But the preset is a subgroup that stores all parameter data as a building block for your cues. So let's say you are doing a play in a school, you've got a handful of moving lights, and you have set them up to a position, to a color, a gobo. You've changed the zoom or the iris. Maybe some of them have shutters, and you've adjusted the shape of the beam. If you just grab all of those lights and store it as a preset, and let's say you're just going to call this scene 1, then that will take that preset data, store it off as a building block so that you can recall that at a later point in time and not have to rebuild that look one light at a time manually every time you need it. So if it's something that you're going to use multiple times, a preset is a pretty good way to store the information. Presets do... The thing that's nice about the preset is it's just going to take all parameter data. So it doesn't matter if it's position or color or beam or edge, it will just grab it all. So it's a simpler way of working than with palettes. Palettes are a little more discrete, and we'll talk about palettes next. So palettes they're also subgroups, and they store data as building blocks for cues just the way that presets do. The difference is that traditionally these are broken down into 5 attribute families, and those are intensity, position, color, beam, and edge. So intensity is going to have your intensity parameters. Position and color are pretty self-explanatory. Beam is going to have all the parameters that affect the inside of the beam. So that would be gobos, prism, animation wheels, right? Anything that's going to change the beam of light that's coming out of the fixture. Edge parameters are attributes that affect the perimeter of the beam. Zoom, iris, focus, edge, shutters, all of that would fall into the category of an edge parameter. And later on we'll show you where this is, because one of the unique properties of Neo is that you can modify all of this. So you could decide that you want to add things to your position palette or take things out of your edge palette, and that's completely customizable, and we'll talk about and show you that. Effects are dynamic states that can be stored into cue subs or played back on their own. And when I say a dynamic state, I mean it's a single item where the lights are moving, they're changing. This could be an intensity effect where they're doing a marquee chase. It could be a color effect where they're going through the spectrum of colors of the rainbow. It could be a position effect where they're doing a can-can or a ballyhoo or a circle. Right, all of these are effects. Then we have shortcuts and macros. Shortcuts is unique to Neo, and it's basically a single button press location that will enact multiple presses. So if you have a command that you do a lot, and it's the same command every time, then you might want to put it into a shortcut. Basically, a shortcut can do anything that the Neo console can do. A macro is similar to a shortcut, but it allows for multiple line entries. So you could have it do a command, wait for a second, then do another command, then wait and do another command. So you can do a whole list of things, and macros can be triggered by shortcuts. So that's a little bit about the terminology. We're going to talk just a little bit about hardware layout, and then we're going to jump right to the software. So the Neo console itself, you've got a big array of buttons, and this entire array of buttons is broken down into tiles, and these tiles or groupings of keys are associated with like keys with each other. That's why they're collected together. And the command tile is where most of the entry is done. That's where you have your 10 key. It's where you have your 10 key, your basic level keys of on, full, and out. And so all of that would happen on that command tile. To the left of that is the action tile, where your two actions on this desk, and there are only two, right? There's record and update. We generally follow what I call the Broadway model, which is you use record to create new items of information, and you use update to edit items that already exist. So if you're wanting to create a new queue, then you would use record. If you have a queue and you're trying to edit the data, then you would use update. To the left of that are playback keys. These are all about changing the output of the desk. So releasing the queue list, going to a queue, going back a queue or forward a queue, all of that's on the playback tile. To the right of the command tile is the advanced tile. Not going to go over every key here, but probably the three most important keys there on that second row, which are time, delay, and follow. So it allows you to assign time to different aspects of, mostly for queues. You can also add delay to different aspects of queues, and follow allows you to do auto follow queues, so that a queue can automatically follow a previous queue. To the right of that you have a trackball, which is primarily used for mouse pointer movement, with the left, center, right buttons above that. Above that trackball you have your display tile. Now that's going to have your traditional theatrical displays, and your main screen interface also has display keys all along the bottom. Going back to the center and going above your command tile are selection and attribute keys. This is where your attribute family keys are of intensity, position, color, beam, and edge. And the keys below that are different selections. So select active, select change, select previous. So there's a lot of good keys there. You have a row of shortcut keys at the top. There are 4 encoders for parameter control with screens that identify what's assigned to the parameters. You have a level wheel top right. The 3 faders, you have 2 grandmasters. The reason we do 2 is to easily allow you to separate your rig. You may want to put intelligent fixtures on one fader and conventional fixtures on another. The third fader, the one by itself, is called the master fade time. This is a great live event feature which allows you to change the time at which live action occurs. So if I grab a bunch of lights and tell them to go to a color palette, if I'm doing this live and busking for a show, then I could use that master fade time to temporarily assign time to all of this live stuff that changes. So if you go to a slow song, you might want to increase that master fade time, and when you go to a fast song, you might want to throw it all the way down to just bump those changes. So that is a little bit about the console layout. Your main screen layout may look slightly different than mine, and we're going to talk about some of these things. I have simply, prior to starting this training session, started a new show. So I went Options, New Show, and that came up with my options for new blank show. You also see here on my screen I have something called elementary template. This is a template file that I created, but I won't explain it. So template files allow you to take a file that has been patched. It may have some basic submasters, it may have some basic groups or palettes, whatever might be appropriate for the theater's environment that isn't really going to change, right? There, especially in the schools, your hang, right, your light plot that's in the air, it may not physically change. Therefore, your patch should probably never really change. So that can all be set and created as a template file. That way, the school, as they go from one production to another, they could choose to just open that template file for the next production, and that would clear out everything that was not part of that template file, which may include cue list or special subs or special palettes as a great starting point. So I'm going to hit cancel because I've already created my new show file. So what I want to do is first talk a little bit about the layout and what we have here, and then we'll start looking at patch and then channel control. So here is our basic channel grid. If I go under the view pull down, we call this our classic grid. So there are different ways to view this data. You could even create a magic sheet. I'm going to keep us on classic because I think that's the most historical screen and the most common screen for people to use. Down here at the bottom, I have an attribute window. Now yours may or may not be open. I'll show you where it is. So if we go into view, open the split view of channels. This is where I have my intelligent light or ML view checked off. I'm just going to uncheck it to give us more space to see our channel grid, because at this point I don't have any attributed fixtures patched. The other thing over here, which is a fairly new tool that I'm very excited is our quick select bar. So if I go under view, display options, my second one down is called quick select bar. Just for the moment I'm going to turn it off, and I would say this is probably one of the simpler layouts of this particular screen. You've got your channel grid, or your classic channel grid for the main part of it, and we have our sidebar, which is going to show some very useful default information, and it's going to show our cue list and give us some basic cue list buttons to activate and manipulate the cues. Down here at the bottom next to the live button, you will see our command line. So as we start typing information, that will show up here. Notice at the end I have a button that says console keys. If I go back to this live indicator, you may notice it's actually a toggle, and I can toggle the console keys on or off. If I have that toggled off, and if I want to record, then I can just type it freeform directly from my command line. If I have my command my console keys toggled on, then it's going to use keyboard shortcuts, and I can just hit R and that will put record on the command line. While we're here, we'll talk about soft keys. Soft keys will appear based upon what is typed into the command line. They appear directly above the command line to help you as you're programming. All along the bottom are display keys. Some of these are going to be pull down screens, like the more is going to be a nice pull down list. There are some like system properties which are going to open a floating window. So this is a window that's floating on my main monitor. Then there will be others that will simply open up and replace this window. For example, we are now in the live screen. We know that by the indicator in front of the command line. And if I go to blind, then that is going to replace that live screen. So those are the two different types of screens you're going to get, and the different ways that these buttons are going to interact for you. So I'm going to go back to my live display. One thing I've learned when working with Neo is I personally am not a fan of the floating windows, because I find that it's super easy to just click outside that window, and in some cases those screens will disappear, and one would think they've actually closed, but they haven't. They just simply, you've just changed your focus by clicking outside, and now it's focused on something else, and they can tend to just be in the background. This is why I use the close button a lot, and it's a dedicated button on the console itself, sort of top left. When I'm on Neo PC, I can just use the X in the corner to close that. But I'm a big fan of always closing these windows when I'm done interacting with them, so that I don't have open windows that collect along the way. Along the top are command buttons. Some of these commands are going to have a little slice on the right, which will allow you to open up to a pull down list, which will have a deeper set of commands than just what the individual button does itself. So I want to talk about channel control modes for a moment. Your basic channel control mode in Neo, it's not labeled anywhere. You're not going to find a button that says basic mode, but the way it works is if I select a channel and then I select another, oops, sorry, I have inclusive mode turned on. I didn't want to talk about that just yet. So if I grab a channel and then grab another channel and then grab another channel, notice it deselects those channels. This is a very inherently theatrical way of working. So I'm going to click and drag, and there's 21 through 27, and I'm going to do add at, so shift and the 2 key, which would be add, and add at is an old strand command to just put the lights at full. And then I'm going to go grab another set, and notice it released them so that when I do at 5 enter to go to 50%, it doesn't affect that first set of channels. So that's why it is that way. Now while we're here, because I want to release these channels and then talk about one of the other modes, is let's talk about the release key. So notice red is an important color. All colors are important, and they give you a lot of information within Neo. Red tells us channels have been changed since the live state has been recorded. So we don't have anything recorded yet, so these have been changed. I have two sets of channels here. One I have currently changed and selected, and that's 31 through 36, and then I have 21 through 27, which are selected. I'm sorry, they're adjusted but not selected. So I can use my wheel on my IntelliMouse and I can roll these channels up and down. Notice you get a parentheses value on the right, which shows you where they came from. If I hit release, what that's going to do is release the channels that I have selected. It has left the ones that have been adjusted, because that is your second step of release. So release can be a two-step process: what is currently selected and everything else that has been adjusted. So I'm now going to go under the select active pull down and turn on inclusive mode. So this is where I could grab a channel, then another, then another, then another, and then I could roll them all up together or provide them with a command line input like at 75, enter. And enter is the command that the key that completes the command, like the period on the end of a sentence. I find most people theatrically like to work without inclusive mode turned on. The live event people tend to work with inclusive mode turned on. So it's your choice, whatever makes most sense for you. If you're on a console, you have a button that says inclusive mode at the top of your command tile. So let's go into patch and let's get away from just these dimmer channels that we have. So we have a display button at the bottom here called patch. Obviously, if you're on your console, you have your display keys in your display tile above your trackball. And one thing I'm going to do is talk about the interface, and then we'll look at the data that we have. So on the left-hand side, we have our fixture table. So this is going to be a table showing all fixtures that are patched. To the right is your DMX output table. So this is going to show your outputs and how they're assigned from 1 to 512 per universe. So you'll see you have tabs for each universe along the top based upon the number of universes that you said you want to control. Down here bottom right is your fixture library. So the fixture library has I think over about 17,000 fixtures in it now, and these are all in here and available by manufacturer, and you can click on the manufacturer and that will open up and show you the fixtures within each manufacturer. This box here will determine the type that your console is set to patch. So right now, if we were going to patch anything, it's going to patch dimmers. Now, one thing I like to do is go into system properties, and I can see currently I have my number of desk channels set to 4,000. It really is just because of some of the show files that I've been working with. You're probably set to a smaller number. It could be 500, it could be 1,000. It's perfectly fine. There's really no reason to change it as long as you're getting the capacity that you need. Number of desk channels has nothing to do with DMX universe authorization. This is completely arbitrary. It can go up to 25,000 if you need. I recommend you keep it no larger than you need to minimize the amount of processing that the software has to do. This is where you determine how many universes that you're communicating with over a network. This is where you would determine what protocol you're using in your universe setup. You can see I've got mine set up for 10 universes of streaming ACN. Another nice feature which is unique to Strand consoles and Neo is Strand Advantage. Strand Advantage allows Neo to output on unauthorized universes to control the Strand, Silicon, Showline, and Verilight attributed fixtures. So if you happen to have a console that's authorized for 2, 3, maybe 4 universes, yet those universes, you fill them up, right? You're pretty much using your desk capacity. You could get Verilight fixtures, Strand attributed fixtures, some of our older Silicon or Showline units, patch them up on universes 5 and above, and as long as there are fixtures, then they will output. And you can do this to the full capacity of the Neo, which is 100 universes. So it's a great feature to help you expand your fixture offering in your theater without incurring additional cost on the console side. So now that we know how many channels I have, I mean, I could have scrolled down as well. But what we want to do is start looking at and talking about patching. So I generally like to start with clearing out my patch or unpatching everything. And this is an old traditional strand command to get rid of information. So I'm going to say 1 through. Now I have my console keys on. So I typed 1 and then I typed the slash key, which put through on the command line. And I'm going to say, because I have 4,000 channels, I'm going to say 4,000. You may only have a 500 or 1,000, so you can adjust this number accordingly. And then I'll say at enter. At enter is an old strand command, meaning to get rid of the instruction. And that has cleared this out. So I'm going to go back to the top. I'm just going to hit 1 enter. And that will page back up for me. So let's see, I have a question somewhere. All right, if you can't find your system properties, you may be on a laptop that has a lower resolution than what I'm showing, which is 1980 by 1020. What you may need to do is go to options and you can get to system properties from there. So I've cleared that out, and now we're going to look at patching fixtures for our show. So I can look over here and I can see that all of these are now unpatched because I've cleared that out. And I'm going to recommend that you just sort of follow along with this. We are going to patch some regular dimmers, but we are going to patch some LEDs and moving lights. So we're going to start and say, you know, I've got 48 dimmers that I'm going to be, you know, where I've got incandescent fixtures. So, and I just want them to be a 1-to-1 patch, and that's perfectly fine. Now, for a custom patch, you can just simply say channel number at DMX address. I'm just using an example of channel or fixture 1, address 12, enter, and notice that has assigned patch address 12 in the first universe to fixture 1, and I can see that assignment here in my DMX outputs. There is a switch bottom right if you prefer to patch output number at channel number. You can switch that over. I generally have sort of taught myself to stay in the channel at output world because it makes more sense when you're dealing with attributed fixtures. So this process of channel number at address could be repeated for whatever custom patch you need. If you go under options, you could see, you want to get fancy, you could import patch from a LightWrite file. You could import patch directly from a CSV file. So there are options for a more advanced way of doing this. So I'm going to clear this out by just doing 1 at enter. And now I'm going to go back to the original idea of 48 addresses for channels 1 through 48 in a 1-to-1 fashion. So I'm going to do 1 through 48, and again the through is a slash key with the console keys turned on. And I'll hit at, and then I'll say the starting address is 1. Now I could have said the starting address is 101, and then it would match those up accordingly. But I'm just going to say start at 1, and then hit enter. And here's my dimmers assigned to channels 1 through 48. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. The other thing I'm going to do is something that is a little unique to Neo, but I find it so incredibly helpful. So I'm going to go back up to the top, so I'm just going to do 1 enter, and you'll notice you have several columns of information here on your fixture side. If your screen is not broken up the way mine is, or if you find you don't have enough room on your fixture side or not enough room on your output side, you can grab that vertical bar between the two and move this to get what you need. The other thing you can do is go to the visible columns tab because there are a lot of columns in this table, and you can turn things off so that you're only looking at columns of information that makes sense to you. And you can see I've already turned off quite a few for what I need. So what we're now going to do is look at these 48 channels, and we're going to label some of this information. We're going to label position, purpose, and color. So the point of this is that we're going to be able to take advantage of this in our live screen once we have it in. It's not just going to be informational, but the whole goal is to try and help us get away from all of the numerical references, because sometimes that's just not very convenient to need to know, well, if I want my front light down left, I've got to turn on channel 43. And we wind up sort of memorizing a lot of numbers when we do production work. And the goal of this is to sort of get it back to real world information. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you guys some basic information. We're going to think of this as a simple little 9-area plot where we have 3 areas down center, down left, down center, down right. We have 3 areas mid stage, mid left, mid stage, and mid right. Then we have 3 areas up stage, up left, up center, up right. And kind of like a tic-tac-toe board. And we're gonna have our area, our systems. We're gonna have some front light. We're gonna have some back light. We're gonna have some side light. That's all to cover these areas. So for this, we're first going to start with position. Now, channels 1 through 9 are going to be our front light that has our warm gel. So our warm front light, that is where these fixtures are hung in our front of house cove position. Again, your terminology may vary. You may want to call it FOH for front of house. You may want to call it cove. You may want to call it beam. Whatever works for you. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to choose the term cove. And before I hit enter, I'm going to hold down the shift key and the down arrow. And I'm going to copy this information down through fixtures 1 through 9. Now I'm going to come to the purpose column. And again, the purpose of channels 1 through 9 are my warm fronts. And I'm going to abbreviate a little bit because I like to keep my screen as clean as possible by abbreviating. And then I'm going to shift down arrow to copy. The third thing that I'm going to do is skip the color description column because that's going to auto-populate. I'm going to come over to the color column where I'm going to put in the gel information. Now, for me, I'm going to select Roscoe 305. So I'm just going to do capital R, there's no spacing, 305, and I'm going to copy that down. And if you'll notice, 2 things have happened. As it put the color in, it referenced the gel color from the library because we do have the basic gel libraries built into the software. And it also put the gel number in the color description column for me. We're now going to move, I'm going to skip 10 because I like to align my fixture numbers with my area numbers so that fixture 5 is for area 5 and fixture 9 is for area 9. So we're going to do the same thing with 11 through 19. So these are our cool front lights. These are also going to be in the cove, and again shift arrow to copy down. I'm going to come over here to cool fronts and again shift down arrow to copy that down. And look, I went one too far, so I'll just highlight it, click backspace, enter to clear that out. And now I'll come into color and I'm going to say this is Roscoe 65 and shift down arrow to copy that down. So again, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Now I'm going to fill the rest of this in. You can fill it in with sort of whatever works for you, but for me, we're going to go to the first electric and the second electric and the third electric for side light. So these are going to be pipe ends right at the end of the electric where I've got a left center right on the first electric, a left center right on the second, and a left center right on the third. So I'm going to call these high sides and copy that down. And my gel here is a Lee 201. Here in my 30s, these are going to be on this. These are going to be backlight. So for the downstage backlight, that's going to be on the second electric. for the next set is going to be on the third electric, and the next set is going to be on the fourth electric. And these are going to be backlights, and this is going to be a deep blue, so I'm going to choose R85. And we're going to leave it at that. So we've got a few things here. Again, this is just for informational purposes, so we're going to go live now. And we're going to get this banner asking we want to save the patch information that we've changed, and we do. So I had some errant commands here. I'm just going to say nope, don't run them, clear them out. And here we are back at our classic grid, and now we have some useful information where I've got 1 through 9 labeled for cove and warm fronts, 11 through 19 cove and cool fronts, and so on and so forth. So this is great informationally. But now's where the magic starts. So I'm going to go under View and Display Options, and we're going to turn on that quick select bar that we had a little earlier. And now this is populated by the position label information, the purpose label information, and the color information that we provided. So now if I want to grab all of my warm fronts and put them at a level, I'll just say at 5. Enter, and now I'm going to grab my cool fronts and we're going to put them at 30%, so at 3, enter. Then I'm going to grab my high sides, or I could think about them in terms of color and say, well, I'm going to grab all my Lee 201 fixtures and I'm going to put these at 80%. And if we're happy with this, then we're going to record a cue. So I'm going to click down into my command line. I'm going to hit R for record, and if all I want to do is record cue, I can just hit enter, and that has recorded my first cue as Q1. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, and that you see how easy it is to use that quick select bar to select different types of fixtures based upon your label. So a question has come up: how do you deselect from the select bar or release? So there's a couple of ways to go about that. Deselecting and releasing are two different things. So if I'm in the situation here where all I want to do is just get rid of the red boxes, nothing has really been changed. I can hit release, and that's perfectly fine. However, if I have selected and I've made some changes, so now I've put them at 70%, and all I want to do is clear what I have selected, there's a button up here on your main monitor that says clear selected. Now they are no longer selected, although they have not been released. But I'm going to hit release now, which will take us back to the queue that we're in. Notice here I'm sort of seeing 18 channels across. I could choose to make this make it a little wider, a little skinnier on my sidebar, and get 20 wide. So you can sort of set this however you want. I've sort of gotten accustomed to having my sidebar sort of a certain width. That's sort of about what I like. But again, your mileage may vary, and you can get this set really any way you want. Now, while we're here, actually I'm going to go back in the patch and put in some intelligent fixtures before we get too involved with channel control and recording. So we'll go back in the patch, and now let's think about the next type of fixture that we want to patch. So I'm going to make my right side a little bigger by moving that vertical bar. And there are two ways to going about patching. One thing I haven't talked about yet, and I'll take a little moment to bring this up, is if you are on a console and on the latest software, we have added the ability for encoders to manipulate the screens. So if I am in if I'm in patch, then my top encoder will pan my channel window, so it would be the equivalent of sort of doing a right-left arrow on that fixture table. The level wheel above would be the equivalent to scrolling up and down this list. The second encoder will go through and select the different universes. The third is going to scroll through your DMAX outputs on the universe you have selected, and the fourth wheel will scroll through your fixture library, and you could click and open a brand and then scroll down within that brands list. So there and those encoders also have the same flexibility in other screens as well. They work in live, they work in the group display. Very, very useful additions that we've been able to make. So we are going to patch some LEDs. Again, there's two ways of going about it. I'm going to go down and we're going to patch up our Showline SL155s. So I'm going to scroll down until I find Showline. I'm going to click on that blue arrow to open up this window where I can then go through and see all of the fixtures within the brand Showline. And I can scroll down until I find what I'm looking for. Sometimes that can be the most comfortable way of working, but there's also another way of working. And here I'm getting to all the SL Power 155s. If you know the fixture model that you're looking for, but you just want to see what all the options are, you can go directly into that fixture maker model box and you can start typing in information. So I could type SL, and as soon as I get 3 characters in, it's going to sort for me. So I can do SL Par space 155, and now I can see everything that I have available here. For this example, I want to patch up the RGBW 16 bits, so I can select that, and now that fixture has been selected for me and I can see it here in the list. Alright, so we're getting a comment that they don't have the full fixture library for some reason. This has happened to a couple of people. It seems to be that the full fixture library did not download. So I would recommend just sort of following along here, or pick a simple fixture available for you, so that you don't miss some of this training. But you may want to re-download the software from the link. But I've had a couple of people that had that problem last week, so hopefully you'll be able to do that, Mark, and get back up and going. So here we have the SL Power 155 Zoom. I've selected the RGBW 16-bit version, and now that will be the type that we patch. So we'll need to figure out what channel or fixture numbers we want to use. I like to start at a minimum with the next tens. So this would be 51 would be the next logical place for me to start. I do know a lot of people that, especially from the live event side, that when they go to a new type of fixture technology, they like to go to the next hundreds. So just for the sake of the class, we'll do that. So I would like us to patch up 10 of these SL155s, and we're going to start with the next hundreds, so that would be with 101. So we'll say 101 through 110, and then at to allow us to determine the starting address. Now I can look here and we can see that we've used 1 through 48, so we have a lot of addresses available on Universe 1. But to simply show you how to do it, we're going to patch these up into Universe 2. So this is where I would say 2.1. So that will be Universe 2, address 1. That's going to be the starting address for the first fixture, and then it will just simply use the next available address as it goes to the next fixture available to patch the limit or the capacity that we have decided, and we have decided that this is 101 through 110. So I do that. We get channel 101, which is addressed at 2.1. It's an SL Power 155 Zoom. If I want to look, I can see here that I have a bar that covers 16 addresses, and it shows the parameters and it tells me which channel and which address it uses and what the description of that parameter is. Notice you'll see some, like address 9 will say red and 10 will say red with an asterisk. That means that the asterisk version is the fine channel, or the 16-bit address, or the 16-bit channel for that fixture. And we could choose, let's say these are all backlights, so some of them are on the second electric, some are on the third electric. I always forget to click in the box. And that's how I get my errant keystrokes on the command line. And some are on the fourth electric. So I'll just clear this out now. And I'm not going to worry about purpose for this particular one. I'm going to hit live, yes to save, go back just so we can look and we can see we have 101 through 110, where some of these are on the second electric, some are on the third, some are on the fourth. And notice in my quick select bar on the left side, I now have a button for fixture type. So this is a single button press that will allow me to select all of the Showline PAR 155s. Oh, I have a question. Is there a way to customize each new line of desk channels? For example, if I want my conventionals on one line, my LEDs to start on the second, and movers on the next. You know, it's interesting. That's something that we've talked about. There's really no way to sort of numerically organize this within the classic view screen. However, there's nothing that would stop you from building your own magic sheet. So what I like to do under view, I went to magic sheet. I'm going to turn the grid on because that helps me align things. And you could easily, I'm just going to select 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to go down here at the bottom to fixture blocks, because I like to work with fixture blocks rather than a symbol on my magic sheet. I'm going to say add. I've got 3 buttons here where I could make these small. Oops, sorry, I need to grab them all. Where I could make them small, medium, or large. I'm going to make them medium. And I'm going to, there we go, just click one. And I'm going to drag 1 up here, 2 here, 3 here. And then I'm going to grab 101 through 103 and say add. And then I'll put those here and here and here. So you could certainly go in and create your own with a magic sheet. I will now turn the grid off, hit hide, and now I have this screen that I can zoom in or out, make it whatever size or scale I want. So you can create your own customizable version. So now I'm going to go in view back to my classic grid. And let's take a look at patching up some movers. So we'll go back in the patch. And again, you can choose you can choose to navigate through this fixture list with the manufacturers, or if you know what you want, you can just type it in. I really don't care what you select. I'm going to choose the VL2600s. And it's a family of Verilights, LED-based Verilights, where we have profiles, spots, and washes. So I like the profiles. I generally don't need the enhanced mode. So I'm just going to grab the VL2600 profile 16-bit, and now my fixture type is set. And I'm going to patch up 10 of these. Since it's a new set of technology, we're going to say 201 through 210. And I'm going to put this in my third universe, so 3.1. I can see they're addressing here. If I need, I can look here in my tab for my third universe to see all the parameters and how they're set, and I'm pretty well good to go. I'm going to skip the position and purpose information here for the moment and hit live, say yes to save, and now we have our moving lights. And again, I have a tab or a button, a preset button up here under my fixture list so that I can just grab my 2600 profiles quickly or my PAR 155s quickly. Also notice each one of these columns of fixture, position, purpose, and color can be subtracted or expanded. So maybe you don't want to work with positions. You can contract that and give yourself more space for colors, purpose, and fixtures. So whatever works for you. So here we are in Q1. I want to talk about this for a second because the moment we recorded Q1, all the red values went away so that they're no longer selected. They're no longer listed as adjusted, but they are now, in this case, blue. And blue is the color of levels that are going up because blue is up like the sky. So these levels are higher than they were in the previous queue because there really was no previous queue. So this is sort of the first queue, so they're probably all going up. If I look in my sidebar, I can see that I have a blue background for this particular queue, which lets me know that Q1 is the queue that I am selected on. The yellow border lets me know that this is the queue that I am active in. So Q1 is the one that's outputting because of the yellow border, and the blue background lets me know I'm selected on this queue. The reason why selected queue is important is just all about speed of programming. So if I wanted to change time on Q1, I do not have to type in Q1 and then time. Because it's the one I'm selected on, I just go right to hitting the time button and it put Q1 time on the command line for me, and I say let's give this a time of 10, and then I can change it. So it's a small thing, but I find it's the little things like this that add up to allowing us to become faster programmers. So that's why I spend time making sure and teach this stuff. So I think this would be a really good time to save our show file, because if I look here, it says unnamed show. The asterisk after it lets us know that changes have been made in the file since it has been changed. So I'm going to go to options. I'm going to say save file. And this is a fairly new file interface. And you generally work from left to right. So I can do save show, save a packed show, or save a template. We talked about a template earlier. A packed show is grabbing everything about the console. It's the show file, it's the console settings, it's the DMX outputs, it's the network configuration, pretty much everything involved in cloning one system to another. So it's something that occasionally we ask for at tech support to really see what you're seeing. For the most part, unless you're cloning a system, it is likely not going to be anything that you need. So we're just going to save the show. And now I come to the second box where I can just go to the home, which is the Neo Shows folder, which we recommend. You could go to a removable drive if you have a network drive set up, or one of the newer things is we have cloud storage. So if you have direct internet connection to your Neo PC or Neo console, and you have a Microsoft OneDrive, Google Drive, or Dropbox account, you can save directly to those. But we're going to keep it simple for now and just save it to the home, which is the Neo Shows folder. And we're going to call this, I'm going to call this training 4.720. I like to put the date in my show file names, but your mileage may vary. And I hit enter to save. So now I have the name of the show file here. Notice there's no asterisks after it because we haven't changed anything since we have saved. We'll look a little more at channel control. Again, channel control, you can click and drag to grab channels. You can use your quick select bar for these groupings based upon the label information that you put in the patch. I'm just going to start with these. I'm going to take them to 0. I'm going to bring my backlights. I'm going to just say backlights. We're going to bring those up, and this is going to be my next cue. So I'm going to come down the command line. I'm going to say record. Now I could say record cue number enter. I could say record number enter because record defaults to recording cues. I could just say record enter, or I could just say record record. Any of these will work to store this. If you're not going to put in the number and let the console manage it for you, it's going to increment by 1 at the end of the cue list. So all I have is Q1, so if I just do record enter, it's going to store Q2. And now I'm soaking in Q2, I'm selected on Q2, and it's been stored. Now we have some new information here. We have green information, so 1 through 9 is at 0 in green. Green is the color of levels that are going down, because green is down like the grass. We still have, for the backlights, they're blue because they're going up. All the other channels are purple. Those purple channels are what are called tracked values, or tracked channels. And what this simply means is that we didn't touch those channels. So they were on in Q1, therefore they're still going to be on because we haven't given them an instruction to do anything else. This starts to nudge into talking about the world of tracking, and I'll just give you my little lecture on tracking. The way I like to think about tracking and to teach tracking is that because people get very confused about tracking, and I find there are 3 kinds of people in the world: people that understand tracking, people that don't understand tracking, and people that think they understand tracking. Generally, it's the last group that gets into the most trouble because they understand theoretically how it works. They just get caught up, and they don't often realize that tracking is doing what it's doing while they're cueing a show, and they sort of just lose track of what's happening with it, and they wind up making some bad choices when they record, and at that point they get unexpected results, and then chaos ensues. So the simple way to explain tracking is that it works exactly the way the lighting does in your home. If you, let's say you've had a long day at school, in the theater, at your job, you come home, there's nobody else there, house is dark, lights are off. You unlock the front door and you walk in, you put down your bag. Probably one of the first things you're going to do is turn on the light. So you've now turned on the light in your living room so you can see what you're doing. That is the equivalent of Q1. Next, as you put your bag down, you say, you know what, I'm kind of thirsty. I'm going to go get a drink. So you walk into the kitchen, and the likely first thing you do in the kitchen is turn on the light. What happened to the lights in the living room? Well, the answer is they're still on. So that's tracking. And that it's really as simple as that. A channel is not going to do anything unless you give it an instruction to do something. So back to what we're looking at on screen, those channels in the 20s and in the teens didn't have an instruction to go anywhere, therefore they're just going to stay exactly where they were. So that's the basis for tracking. Now I can tell you exactly why that third group of people, the people that think they understand tracking, why they get into trouble, because they generally don't understand a simple tool called a block cue. And a block cue allows you to put a hard instruction on everything, which is typically used at the end of a scene, at the end of an act. It's often used for fade to black cues or blackouts to make sure that when you go back and edit this cue list that you don't wind up tracking into your blackouts, because that's where they get confused. Block is a key on the console, sort of up top left. In the event that I don't remember what the shortcut key is, I can simply turn off the live key, and then I could just type out block, and you could wind up doing a block cue that way. Once we have a few more cues in here, I will show you guys a little bit about a block cue. So we're going to look a little more at channel control for a moment. So I'm going to grab my LEDs. So I'm going to grab my Power 155 zooms. I'm going to put them at full, so I've got some output by doing add at. And now we're going to talk about color control. So there are multiple ways to do color control. Over here in the sidebar, your sidebar is probably gone from your current playback to your fixture control tab. Within the fixture control tab, the content of that is going to be based upon the fixtures that are selected. So we have 4 tabs for intensity, color, edge, and utility. So for intensity, and again, this is going to vary based upon the type of fixture that you have patched. So if you patch something different, it may be a little different. But the basic premise is I'm going to go to color, and I have a color picker. So I can pick a color off that color picker. I have sliders that I can move. These will also be the same as what you have assigned to your encoders. I've just pulled up this little console hardware box to show you what the encoder screens would look like for a traditional RGBW fixture. So you can hit the button below it, which goes to a minimum for that slider, the button at the top, which goes to the maximum for that slider. You have a percentage box you can roll in and out, or a DMX box, which will allow you to move per DMX address. So a question was, where was that console hardware box? And I'm sorry if I moved too fast, but under the More pull down, console debug window is where you will find that it will show you those screens as the hardware that's connected, or that would be connected. All right, so that's how you can just do a basic color picker. From here, let's look at some different ways that one can activate colors. So a typical thing that I like to do is under the View column, you can open Color Picker. What that's going to do, I've actually already got my Color Picker opened on another monitor, so I'm going to drag it over. So this would give you a floating, oops, I'm sorry, I clicked outside, just the kind of thing I said I didn't like to do. So this will get you a floating box. What I like to do is dock this on my second monitor. There's some very useful ways to manage manipulating other screens. So what I'm going to do very quickly, I'm just sort of blanking out my other monitor, and I think what I'm going to do is change. I'm going to stop sharing and go to a different monitor for this. So I'm now sharing another screen here. Don't worry about the recording box. Obviously you won't have that. But I'm going to grab this opened color picker from my main monitor, and as I move it over here, you'll notice what you should have are these little icons that appear. There'll be one at 12 o'clock, 6, 3, and 9. There'll be some in the middle. If you hover over any of these with your mouse pointer, I haven't let go of this yet, but if you hover over that, it will show you where that window will dock in that monitor. And I'm a big fan of using this, so I'm going to dock it in the bottom half for a moment. And now I've got my color picker docked on my second monitor. I will also take other windows and dock them in. I'll come back. I'm going to come back to my other screen to show you this side of it. So for example, if I wanted my groups display, then I might open that groups window, hit the detach button, and now this is a floating window, and I can move it over and dock it on that second screen. Now I know you can't see my second screen right now, but I'm now going to also take my palettes, pull down top right, I'm going to say detach, and I'm going to drag that over and dock it. And now that I've got 2 or 3 things over there, I'll probably do my shortcut windows and maybe a couple of other things. So let me go back and switch over to that other monitor. So now I've got my palettes window that I've docked in. Anytime you want to dock two things side by side, just drop the first one in the top half. So I've got my groups in the top half. Now I'm going to grab my palettes, and now within that window I'll have buttons, and I'm going to put it at the 9 o'clock button to put it on the left side. I'm also going to do the same thing with my effect. Oh, hang on. Again, I had it set up a little differently. So I'm going to go back to my effect library. I'm going to hit the detach button at the bottom, and I'll show you. Oh, hang on. I'm going to start all this. I'm going to start all this over. So I'll just show it to you from the destination side. So there's my color. I'm going to drop in, and I'm going to grab my groups window, hit detach, and I'm going to drop that in the top half. And you have a vertical bar here where you could move that up or down to distribute that. I'm going to open up my palettes window, top right on the main monitor, hit the detach button. I'm going to dock that in. So now I've got my palettes and groups side by side. I've got my color picker. I'm going to open up my effect library, and I'm going to put that on the left side. For my color picker, I'm actually also going to open up my shortcuts window, which is a display button at the bottom of your main monitor. And we're going to dock that in. And now I get to sort of size these to what makes sense for me. And that's a pretty decent standard second monitor. Color picker, shortcuts, fixture library, palettes, groups. Again, you may have some things that you want to see laid out differently, that you want to change, but I'm a big fan, and I find it very important to use those docking buttons and dock it in. Don't just have these windows floating over here because of again, those floating windows can wind up getting hidden behind other windows, which can increase the frustration, I personally find. Let me go back to my main screen. Once your second monitor is laid out, I like to save this as a window layout, and we have under more a window layout manager, where I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to say this is my program layout. I'm going to put it on a shortcut, so I'm going to put it on shortcut number 1. I'm going to say this is my default layout. That way when you start the console tomorrow, that's the layout that will appear. I'm going to say store new layout. It's going to show, now I'm giving away my secret, I've actually got 3 monitors on my system. So this is going to show a thumbnail of your layout, and once I have it stored, I hit close and I'm off and going. So you can repeat that process for different layouts, so you could have different screen configurations for different ways of working. You could have one for programming, one for playback. Then once you have that, there's a little green arrow here top right that says layouts, where you can actually get a window into up to 15 different layouts, and you can simply press on the button to access it. You could also set a layout to come down your command line, sorry, I'm going to go back into my console key mode, hit R for record, punch a button, and it will snapshot your layout onto your next layout button. And you can do record to create. You can also do update to edit that way. So it's very flexible, very user-friendly, and gets you a lot of flexibility on doing multiple layouts. A couple more things about color control. I'm going to go back to my Power 155s, and we have seen what we can do with our color picker. I've simply gone over and I'm picking on my color picker on my second monitor, or I could do it here under the color tab. But let's say there are gel numbers that I'm comfortable with and I know, and let's say I want these to use R65 color and I know what that is. So you can do this via command line. So I could say at Shift C for color, and then I can type R. I'm sorry, let me do this again. What I meant to do is, this is where I can identify Roscoe by, or there are 4 general manufacturers that we have: Apollo, GAM, Lee, and Roscoe, and they are in alphabetical order. But to keep you from having to go to an external keyboard, you can do it numerically. So Apollo is color family 1, GAM is 2, Lee is 3, and Roscoe is 4. So if I want to go to Roscoe 65, I can say at 4.65, and that will go to Roscoe 65. So, question, how did you save a layout and upload it to a new show file? That I would have to confirm, Pete, but I believe it's in your ability to import a file, and I just don't remember if layouts are one of the options within that import. But that would be under Options, Open, and then on the left hand side there you have import. So that's something you can experiment with, and if it doesn't have everything you need, let me know, and that's something I can talk to the developer about. So here we've had these LEDs go to Roscoe 65, and I can continue this and say, you know what, at Shift C for color, and I want this to be Lee 201. So Lee is 3, so 3.201. Now what's cool about this is, let's say I'm working with a choreographer. Let's say these are not wash fixtures, but they're cyc lights. And the choreographer sits down to start lighting their piece, and they say, you know what, I'd like to see on our cyc, I'd like to see the sun sort of coming from stage left going to stage right. And we're going to identify that 101 through 110, they're all on the same electric, and 101 is stage right and 110 is stage left. So what I want to do is range colors. So I'm going to say at color, and we're going to range from a medium blue, so I'm going to go with Roscoe 68, and now I'm going to say through, or that's the slash key, and we're going to go to Roscoe 312, which is canary yellow. So I have my light stage right that starts in R68, my light all the way stage left, which goes to Roscoe 312, and it's going to range in a linear fashion the colors, right, of RGBW to get a nice linear color fade between those. And you know, I'm kind of proud of myself that I did this for the choreographer. And they say, oh, you know what, actually I think it makes more sense to have the sun coming from stage right. So I say, all right, that's fine. Now I'm going to just say at color, we're going to do 4.312 through 4.68, so we can have it go the other way. And again, I'm pretty proud of myself for being able to do this. And then the choreographer, again, they change their mind and they say, you know what if that sun was sort of coming over the top, right? It's coming over the middle. So what you can do at color, so we're going to do 4.68 through 4.312, and then we're going to do through again. So this is going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in this particular case, we've chosen the same colors for the beginning and the end, and a different color in the middle. So with any of the choreographer's needs, we can give them what they want. So we're going to take that and we're going to record this into a cue. So I'm going to say record, enter, and now we've recorded Q3. We had just recorded the cue with our sunrise coming over the cyc, and I'm going to just make some other changes just so that we have, I'm meant to add 0 enter, record the next cue. And now I'm just going to, for our next cue, we're going to grab everybody, turn off. We're going to do a fade to black because I'm going to show you the block cue before I forget about it. So I'm going to go to my select active pull down, and this would be one of the keys on the desk that I would use of select active. So this is going to select all active fixtures. This one says excluding subs, but I don't have any subs up, so this is perfectly fine. So it's going to grab everybody as a level. I'm going to say at 0 enter, and then I'm going to say record enter to record Q5. So everybody's got a green 0 that had a value. I will now type, I'm going to say Q block enter. So it is the letter Q for Q, and then I'm going to say Q5. I'm going to turn off the console keys because I can't remember what the shortcut is. So Q5 block enter, and now Q5 has a block command. Notice it put a hard value or a hard 0 on all channels that had no information, and this will ensure that if we go back into Q1, and now I'm going to bring up a channel it's never been brought up before. I'm going to bring up 42, just going to roll it up to a level. And now that we're in our editing mode, we want to update this cue. And so I'm going to say, sorry, I'm going to turn on the console keys again, hit U for update. I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to update. And how do I know whether I'm in cue only or tracking? If you look here at the top of your sidebar cue list, there's some very useful and important information that's identified on the console, and it says record live, meaning that when you hit the record key and you store this as a cue, it's recording live or recording everything that's going out to your patched channels. There are different options for recording. If I hit record, I can see here I have soft keys. If I click on Q, then I have a button that says record mode, and the different record modes are live, selected, active, and changed. So recording live is the standard theatrical way to record. Selected would be only recording selected channels or channels that are currently selected. Active would be only storing channels that have a level above 0. So if you have moving lights that have been moved, that you don't have an intensity, then it will ignore those. And recording changed is only storing information that has been adjusted or changed. So I'm just going to hit backspace to clear this out. We can see that we've now we're going to look at the next piece of information, which is tracking mode. So we are currently in tracking mode. So if I look at this, I've updated Q1 to have 42 at 26%. If I hit go, we should find that channel 42 tracks into Q2, because let's remember, Q2 or any cue had no instruction for channel 42. Therefore, the only instruction was in Q1 where it was told to go on. So now as we run through 2, it's still on. I'm going to run into Q3 where 42 is still on. Q4, it's still there as well. And if we go to Q5, because the block had already given it an instruction of 0, that has an instruction to go out, and this is how you maintain your fade to black or your blackout cues while using tracking. So it's important to understand that the block cue is going to be a really good tool for you when you are tracking. Now the next thing listed here in yellow text is mark late. This is simply telling us that marking is the feature by which the console will prepare the attributed fixtures before intensity is required in the cue. So let's just take an example. I'm going to go to Q3. I'm going to grab one of our moving lights. So I'm going to grab 201. We're going to turn this guy on. Now, if I look in my fixture control sidebar, I have some different tabs because, again, this is a moving light over an LED, so this has more to control. So I'm going to go to position, and I'm going to select a location within the target box. You can click and drag. You can go to your pan, spin edit box, and you can move that up and down. You can do the same thing with tilt, either in degrees or with pan information or tilt information. So that's going to move it per DMX value. So if I want to pan 45 degrees, I'm going to say 45. And let's say I want to tilt 90. I'm just going to type that in, and that's my position. I'll go to color. I'm going to pick a color. I'm going to go to beam, where I can select a gobo. I'm going to select my honeycomb reverse, and we're going to go into rotate mode, where I'm going to tell this to rotate in an RPM of 7 revolutions per minute. I'll go to edge. We're going to increase the zoom. I've got a top shutter cut that I want to bring in, and this is what I want for this cue. Now, I don't remember what cue I'm in, but I don't really have to care. As soon as I come to my command line and hit update, it's going to bring this back for me, and we're going to put this into Q3. So I'm going to hit enter, and that has now been stored. Now that I have attributed fixtures, I find it very important to see my parameters. So I'm going to go under view, open split view of channels, and I'm going to turn back on the intelligent light, or the ML view. This is going to put my attribute window at the bottom of my main monitor so that I can see what I've got going. Now, another tool, again, it's a simple thing, but I find it very important. If you'll notice on my screen, we have the LEDs up here in one box, and my Verilights are in another box, and it may look a little different than what your screen does. I'm going to show you one of the system properties that I like to use. So I'm going to go into my system properties. You can use the options system properties if you need. You may need to look in your bottom left hand corner to make sure you're in the advanced tab. If you're in basic, just switch that over to advanced, and we're going to go into appearances. And right here under ML Intelligent View Options, I'm going to say ML View grouped by fixture type. So if I have that turned off, you're going to get all your fixtures in one table, and I often find that very problematic, because what can happen is, as you can see, I can look at my VL2600s here, and there's a lot of dead space because it's using columns from these earlier channels. So by turning on, again, system properties, appearances, ML View grouped by fixture type, it's going to redraw its own table per fixture type, and it removes any of the dead space. So I find that, I personally find that extremely useful. And I can now see my parameter data in my attribute window. The darker blue is the color of attribute information that has changed. We use a different color because with parameter data, you don't care if the value's gone higher or lower for the sky blue or the green. You just care if it's different. So we have chosen that. We can see all that data that's there for Q3. So we were talking about marking. So here we are in Q3, that's fine. Now I'm going to go back and we're going to start this all over again. So I've just double clicked on Q1, and we've gone to the state of Q1, and we can see 201 is not showing any data at all. But I'm going to hit go, and let's look at what happens at 201. Number one, we notice a new color. So we sort of have a goldenrod color, and that is the color of marking data. And what marking does is it looks ahead to the next cue and sees where the light needs to be. The reason why it picked Q2 to mark is Q3 is not only where the data changes, but where the intensity comes on. So by marking late, it marks as late as possible, so it only looks one queue ahead. So it starts in Q2, and it will mark so that when I hit go for Q3, the light simply comes on with the data, with the light already where it needs to be. So you can go into System Properties, and under Show Defaults, there is a pull-down box for Set Auto Mark. You can have it turned off. You can have it set to mark as early as possible, which is typically what the live event world likes to do, or mark as late as possible, which is typically what the theatrical world does. So I like to do it as late as possible, and that's the way I already had it set, so I'm just going to hit cancel. So hopefully that makes sense. This was simply storing raw data in the queue. Before we get to talking about palettes, what I want to do is talk a little bit about groups and then submasters. So I'm going to say reset. I could also, if I'm on the console, hit release queue list, and we're going to talk about groups. Now, we may not rely on groups as much as we used to with the quick select bar, or there's some other tools. If I go to my select pull down, that also populates the information from patch. This window can also be detached. You'll see the detach button, and you could dock it in your second monitor. A lot of people like to do that rather than the quick select bar because this quick select bar takes up space on your main monitor, and you might rather have it on your secondary monitor, so you can use this. But let's go ahead and say we want to build some groups, so we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to select the fixtures that I want. In this particular case, I'm not going to give them a level, and I'm going to say record group. Notice it says selected, so that means it is only going to record the channels that I have selected, and I have 1 through 9, and that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to say record this as group 1, and I hit enter, and to check it I'm going to hit release. Now, since I have stored my groups in my group window on my second monitor, I can just go over here and click that, and it will select them, and then I can provide them with a level. So that is a typical way to work with groups. I could also select these channels. Now I'm going to put them at a level, and I'm going to record this as group, and I'm going to use the soft key here this time and say record group 21, because I, like a lot of people, like to record my group number to match the first or the lowest channel number within that range. So I have recorded a group, and I'm going to select that group. Actually, here's what I'm going to do. Actually, that got recorded as group 2, so I'm going to say group 2 at, let me see. Alright, so what I'm going to do is take a look and show you guys. I'm going to look a little deeper as to what we've got. So I'm going to open up my group display window, and here I can look at the data. Now, this likely on my system, it appeared at full screen on my main monitor. It's going to appear wherever you last had it. So here I've got my list of groups. Down at the bottom I have my the details of what's in that group. So if I can select them at the top, and it will show me the data at the bottom. So here I'm looking in my channel grid. You have different views depending upon what data you're looking for. I like the channel grid because it most mimics what I would have on my live screen, where I can see the channels and their levels. Now I'm in a group command line, so I can choose to edit information. Maybe I want channel 21 to go to 30% instead of 50 in this group, so I can change that. Maybe I want to add another channel. Maybe I want to add channel 30 to go to 50%. So that all can be edited here as long as you're in your group command line. I'm going to close this window, And I'm going to go back here. The thing that confused me is I was trying to figure out using add at while they went to full, when I'd forgotten that add at is the equivalent of the on level, which is always going to take them to, if I go into system properties and the show defaults, I'm sorry, it's in, where is it? No, there it is, in system settings, and there's the on level. So it always goes to full. So if I were to take this and say at, come out of command line, at, oh, I know what I need to do. So I'm going to say group 2 at 100, and notice this is where they will go to their recorded values instead of always going to full. So it can be a very useful tool. If you tend to use groups as just a collection of fixtures, then I would recommend not providing them a level. They're not providing anything other than full. That way you don't run into you won't run into this at all. But again, you can record and update groups from the command line, or you can go into the group display and edit things from here. So you have your choice. So I want to talk for a minute about submasters. Submasters can be very useful tools, and people generally use submasters one of two different ways. Either they use them as utility items to activate house lights, work lights, not part of the system that they record into content for the show. And you have others that like to put systems of light onto faders so that they can record them into cues. So you could have a fader that has your front light, and a fader has side light, and the fader has back light, and mix them with those faders and then record your cues. The difference is in when you're recording your cues, how you have this set up to function. So let's get ourselves a few submasters. So we're going to grab these channels, we're going to put them at full, and I'm going to say record sub, and notice it now says record sub active. So recording a sub by default is going to take everything that has a level above 0 and store it into that sub. So I'm going to record this as sub 1. I'm going to check this by hitting release. I'm going to open up my submaster window, and I'm going to roll this up and down, and I can see that it indeed did record. Now the defaults of the recording style, like recording cues live, recording subs active, recording groups selected, that is all configurable once you really understand what it's doing by looking into show details. And this is where we've got our default cue record mode of live selected, active, or changed. Again, I recommend live for theatrical environments. I can go into my groups, palettes, and sub tab, and my group default record mode here is selected, and here are the options that you have, and also the submaster default record mode. So you may find that your preferred way of working can vary a little bit from mine, and this is where you can set it to work the way you want it to work automatically for you. So I'm going to give us another sub just so that we have a couple of things. So I'm going to turn these two faders on. Notice we have a new color. Yellow is the color of levels that come from a submaster. Now I'm going to bring up a few of the backlights, some of the LEDs, and let's say I want to record a cue. So I'm going to hit the record button. Now here's the question. When I record this cue, and I'm going to let it record the next number, which will be Q6, right? Because it always defaults to the next one at the end of the cue list. Do I want it to include levels from a submaster or not? What determines how this functions are these buttons right here. And we're going to talk about how it applies to submasters as well as effects and palettes. So right now, if I hit record, it's going to include these submasters because this toggle is yellow. If I press the toggle and deactivate it, then the toggle, the text is red, meaning it will exclude submasters from recording. Now this is the way I like to work, so I'm going to show you this way first. And notice we've recorded Q6 with all of these levels changed. However, the submasters are still yellow because they were ignored during that recording. So we're going to repeat this with one of the submasters up. So I'm just going to add these LEDs and we'll stab up a color. So I'm going to go back to record and say, you know what, this time I do want to include the submaster. We're going to record this next cue, and notice now this is no longer yellow because it was captured by the cue, it was stored in the cue, and the cue is driving its output. If I take this submaster below 60%, you're not going to see any change because the cue is functioning on a highest takes precedence basis. Sometimes we just call this HTP. So what this means is the sub is controlling these levels, the cue is controlling the levels, but the cue is controlling the levels at a higher level. Therefore, the highest value wins, and that's why it's called HTP. If I take this above 60, now the sub has control. Now the cue is still there outputting, but I really don't know because the sub is taken over. So this will allow you to understand a little better how HTP works, and colors will help you understand who's really in charge. Because if now I go and release this cue list, the levels from the sub are still going to stay there because they're still in control and the highest value wins. So I'm going to double click to run Q7 just so we have that and move forward. So I find it important to set these up the way you want to think when you're recording so that you don't have to worry about it. If you typically like to include subs, then have it turned on. If you typically like to use subs just for utility functions, house lights and such, then you might want to turn it off and function that way. The one next to it here affects how one if when recording cues it includes running effects, which I like to have turned on. And this one is for palette information, and if I have moving lights or LEDs in palettes, that when I record, if that's yellow, it will include the palette reference. If I have that turned off, it will still store the lights exactly where they are, but it will just store raw data. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, I want to talk a bit about palettes because that's the next step. That's the next step on your building blocks. So we all know that from before the break how we docked our palette window off onto the second monitor. Just for the sake of this training, I'm going to put it back onto the main monitor for the simplicity of the demonstration. But feel free, if you have it on your second monitor, keep it over there because it'll actually make the workflow a little better. So I'm going to hit reset to clear out the cue. I'm going to grab all my 155s. I'm going to turn them on, and we're going to mix ourselves a color, and then we're going to store that as a palette. So this is a nice, lovely little lavender. From the color on screen, to me it looks a lot like Roscoe 57, and we're going to store this as a palette. So I'm going to hit record, and I can say color, and let's say I want to record this as color 1, and that has been stored as color 1. I can tell because of the text inside the color bar. I can also tell by looking at my attribute window. I can see my color preset, my RGB colors, my color timing. So all color parameter information has been, I get to see the actual data, plus there's a second line which will show the label for that palette. and if I open my palettes window, I can go to color, and there it is. If I want to label it, I can right click and say edit description, and I'm going to call this lavender. So again, you can label it whatever you want. There are other ways of working. I find, especially with a second monitor and with that window docked, what I prefer to do is, it's sort of a salmon color, is to record and then just go to that palettes window and click on the next open palette. Then I get a banner where I can label this all in one command. And then I can continue to repeat this process for as many colors as I need for my production. I'm just going to get us 3 of them here. So we have some different things, and I can, go through and access any of them that I want. Now it's important to remember that just because I have stored all 10 155s into that color palette doesn't mean I have to apply it to all of them at any one time. So what I'm going to do is hit release, and I'm going to use my use my control key to grab 101, 103, 105, 107, 109, go to full and select lavender, and then I'm going to grab 102 for, again, holding down my control key on my PC keyboard. I'm going to put these at 50%. I'm going to go to palettes. I'm going to put these in salmon, and I like this, so I'm going to record my next cue. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody, a little bit about storing color palettes and recalling color palettes. So that was both how to record them command line as well as record them with the graphical interface. Now I'm going to go a little deeper with color palettes. Let us now grab our movers, and we're going to turn these guys on. And let's say it's like, ooh, I really like that salmon color. I wonder if I could use that. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to click on and find that my movers do have access to that color. So I start thinking about it, and it's like, well, wait a minute. I didn't store any information for these fixtures. So how is that working? So we started looking at the consoles that are out there, and many of them have multiple types of palettes. There are consoles that have 2 and 3 different types of color palettes. You've got what we call specific palettes, which are palettes that only will play back data that is stored specifically for those fixtures. Then you have color palettes by fixture type, which will take data that's stored for one fixture and you can apply it back to any fixture of the same type. And then you have others that are more global, and depending upon the console and the manufacturer, they have different terms for them. They have universal palettes, global palettes, specific palettes, and it was it could easily be very, very confusing. So what we've done is created just sort of one type of palette, but we've given it an option, and that option is called virtual palettes, and we have this turned on by default for color. So here's for color palettes. So here's the way it works. If I have data for a particular fixture for a color, then it's going to use that information first. Then if I'm going to clear selected. So if I have for 201, if I have data that I have stored as this color palette, this salmon color palette, it's going to use that first. Now let's say I go to 202 and it I want to use that same palette, but I don't have any data in this fixture. It's now going to look at all the other examples of its fixture type, and it will use that as a secondary reference if it doesn't have its own data. So that solves the issue of having this per fixture type. But let's say this particular fixture doesn't have anything, nor do any of its type have any data. So at that point, it's going to back up and look at any fixture in your patch, starting with the lowest channel number first. And if it finds data that it can convert and use, then it will. So color is probably the most useful attribute family for this to work. We generally find for position palettes, that's not often a desired tool. Same thing for beam palettes and edge palettes. So if you go into your palettes window and we're going to look at position palettes and I go to options, we'll see that virtual palettes is not turned on. So we generally don't recommend using it for anything but color unless you know exactly the results that you're expected to get. So that takes care of color. So I'm going to grab these movers again and we're going to start playing with position a little bit. I'm now going to record a position palette. So I'm going to hit record, I'm going to go to palettes, I'm going to come over here to position, we're going to click on one, and I'm going to call this down center because I've taken all my lights and pointed them down center. Now I look here in my attribute window and I can see, in fact I'm going to take this up a little bit to see a little more information in my attribute window. So I can see that pan and tilt is the only thing referencing down center because that's my pan and tilt information, or those are the attributes that position affects. Well, there are a number of people, excuse me, I happen to be one of them, that likes for position information to not just manipulate pan and tilt, but it also shapes the beam. If I've got a light that I need to focus on a chair and I consider zoom and other parameters just as much as part of position as anything, potentially shutters, so that it gets the right shape around that item. And I don't want to be managing a position palette and an edge palette because now that's two things that I have to manipulate. So I'm going to show you how that can be managed better. Now at the beginning of the class we talked about that all palettes, presets, groups, subs, they all sort of fall under the groups family. So we're going to go into the groups display and I'm going to go top left under options, and my first selection is edit palette type. Here I now see a table which will show me everything that's going to be captured or stored as I use these different items. So if I look here at group, I can see it's only really referencing intensity. You can ignore the primary parameter. That's actually a historical attribute reference from a long time ago. It's still there, but you can ignore it. So groups are only taking intensity. Submasters are taking all of my attribute families. And notice you have in purple here it says families, and then everything after this is going to be listing all of the attribute families based upon the patch. Now some of these, again, they're sort of historical and you can ignore them. What we're interested in is intensity, position, color, beam, and edge. Then down here you have a listing of individual attributes. We're probably not going to have to worry about that too much, but I'll show you how it works. So for presets, notice presets are taking everything except intensity. Intensity palettes are only taking intensity. Here's position, right? So it's taking all the position information, but I want it to include all the edge parameters. So I'm going to come down here for the row that has edge under the column of position, and I'm going to click, And now when I store a position, it's going to include all the edge parameters. But it wouldn't be uncommon to think, well, beam, right, for beam palettes. When I have a beam palette for gobos, do I want to include the edge parameters so that I always go to a hard edge or a soft edge? So you could come down here and look for that edge parameter and find that it's currently in the edge family, but it's not in the beam palette. So you may want to add that in. You may decide you don't want it in edge, so you can just click and turn these things on and to add and subtract them as needed. So I'm going to add edge to my position. I'm going to say save. I'm going to close this window, and I'm going to close this window. Now it's not going to change anything that's already been stored, but I'm going to go back to these lights. I'm going to give them a new position. I'm going to go to edge, and I'm going to change the zoom. I'm going to create a little box with my shutters because these are focused around the chair. And I'm going to say let's record this. We're under position 2, and I'm just going to call this chair. And now notice it's referencing pan and tilt, edge, zoom, that's all color, but it's got all my framing, shutters, it's got iris, in this particular case, as well as frost. So that's the way you can sort of manipulate and change what your palettes are storing. So you can edit this and set it up to function the way you like to think. And that's one thing that I very typically do when I'm programming a show, because for me that's the way I natively think about position palettes. It doesn't have to be the way you think. You can just think about them as pan and tilt, and that's perfectly fine. So while we're here talking about palettes, let's talk about presets, because sometimes presets are just a simpler way to work for people, and they can just deal with all the parameters in one place. So what I'm going to do here, REL for release, and I'm going to hit reset to get rid of all that. So what I'm going to do is turn these lights on. We're going to select some pan and tilt information. We're going to give that a color. We're going to go into beam and put these in the night sky gobo. We're going to zoom them all the way out, change the edge to make it a hard edge, and here I'm going to look at recording a preset. So I'm going to go into my presets, select one. I'm just going to call this scene 1, and now if you'll notice, this has captured all parameter data in scene 1. So even though your gobo isn't labeled what it is by the description of the preset, you still see the name of the gobo in your attribute window, and this can be a very simple way of working, that you just sort of create presets per scene or per look. Reset all this. I'm going to hit release, and a couple of things we're going to talk about. Obviously, here's our show file. We have the asterisk because it's been changed because we haven't saved in a while. But I'm going to go into system properties. I'm going to talk about our show file automatic backup system, because I do think it is important to safely store your data and to make sure that it's creating backups for you automatically. So under system properties, sorry, I plugged in the USB key to set up my backup. So under system properties, system settings, you have the ability to set 2 locations for automatic backups. I recommend leaving backup location 1 as the default. It goes to a default location. Once I get done to this, we'll take a look at the undo button. I like to set the backup location 2 to go to a to go to a USB key, you could just click the little folder and then go off and assign it as you need. Notice the way I have it set is number of automatic backups is 10 and the backup interval is 5 minutes. So what that means is as long as you're programming, every 5 minutes you're going to get, it's going to store a backup for you. It's going to do that for up to 10 backups. Then after that, it's going to restore backup number 11 and it's going to erase backup number 1. So it always only keeps the last 10 for you, is the way this is currently set, and those are the default settings. Now also something that happens that a lot of people don't know is every time you hit save, it actually does save the previous, the old version, so it doesn't just override it, it turns that into a revision file, and it's going to keep those revision files for you. In fact, the last 10 of those will always be there. So we'll start with that. Get that set. One other thing while I was thinking about it is I wanted to talk about one of the things that I like to do with shortcuts, and that is I like to put a save button on shortcut number 10. I just like to do it on 10. You can put it anywhere you want, but I'm going to hover over 10. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say add quick command macro. This is where I can type in what I want the command to do. This is a command that you could type directly on the command line, and all I want to do is type save. You can have it do a command on the down of the button or the up of the button. We want to keep this pretty simple and just do the down. It's copied the description over and hit OK, and now all I have to do is hit that shortcut button and it saves my show file for me. So I'm a big fan of doing that. And all right, let's talk about undo. So there's a couple of ways to deal with undo. There's a button here at the top underneath this presentation button. I need to move. There we go. Oh, thank you, Robert. The shortcuts are under the More tab if you can't see it at the bottom because of the resolution. Thank you for that. Undo. So undo is a little different than on some other consoles in that undo by itself will undo the last level change. If you want it to undo other things, you generally need to work with that other key. For example, if you want to undo a record, so you could have just recorded the cue, find you made a mistake, you could do undo, record, enter. You can also undo updates, you could undo a delete, you can even undo a release. So let's say you had a bunch of lights on, they're doing what you want, you hit release by mistake, then you could do undo, release, and if you hit release twice to do the 2 stages of release, then you could do undo release, and that would bring everybody back. Now, something that a lot of people find is more useful is there's an undo pull down up here where this information will collect as you program and type. So you can undo channel selection, you can undo a channel state change. Here's where you could undo a record, you could undo an update, and you could undo any cue properties changes. So the group and palette update is grayed out because I haven't updated any groups or palettes. So a lot of people prefer to work that way. If you take anything other than just the last item on the list, it will take everything back, including those items. And one thing I will show you is actually what I'm going to do is make some changes because I haven't really updated much, and we're going to update a cue so that we have a couple of different versions of Q1, and I'm going to show you how you can access every version of the cue that has ever been recorded in that show file. One question, does undo work in the patch window? That's actually something that we've been working on in development. It does not work. You're not going to find it that it does anything in this version of code, although we have added some functionality that is in an alpha version that's floating around the factory now. So it is something that we've recognized that needed to be done, and we've added some of that in, Pete. So that's a great question. So I'm going to spend a minute looking at the full cue list window. So again, this is a floating window. I'm not a fan of floating windows, so I'm actually going to double click the header, and that should expand it to full screen. On the left in this bar would be your list of cues. There's a gear button where you could click on it and get to the properties of that particular cue list. Some of the things that I like, some of the new features, is I could create shortcuts. I'm going to click create a go shortcut for this cue list on shortcut 11, a stop on 12, a back on 13, and a reset on 14. I could also assign an executable fader for the cue list, an inhibitive fader for all the channels in the queue, and a rate fader where you can, which will start at its midpoint, and as you take it up, it's going to make the queue take longer to run, or as you pull it down, it will have it move faster than normal. But I'm going to do that, and I'll show you the shortcuts here in a moment. But looking here, we've got the descriptions, so I could come in here and say scene 1, status, triggers, the list of channels that are in the queue. I've expanded that a little bit. But if I go under, I think it's under queue options, open queue update history. So this is going to show every version of the queue that has been recorded. It has a time and date stamp. I could hit preview, which would preview the queue on stage. If that's the version I want, I can hit apply, and it will restore back to that version. And again, that will be for every version of every queue that's ever been recorded in that show file. Another thing I'll talk about while I'm here before I go back to the shortcuts are scene breaks. So I want a scene break below Q0, and that scene break, we'll call this scene 1. And now that I have that scene, maybe I'll call this lights up. And let's say I'll do a scene break after Q5, which would be scene 2. And now I have these graphical, I'll close and go back. Next thing I'd like to talk about is effects. So again, effects are dynamic states that can be played back with cues or subs primarily, or under their own effect playback. So I'm going to go to Q1. And I'm going to, let's say that we want this effect, an intensity effect. I've got 3 channels here that are for a fireplace, and they're doing a little flicker effect. So I'm going to grab those 3. I'm going to go to, I had put my effect library on my second monitor, but I'm going to do all of this on the first monitor just to keep it simple for us. So I'm going to say twinkle is what I want. So I've got that doing a little twinkle thing. And here's what I'm going to do, because now I sort of need to manage this. I've got library effect control, where I can manipulate the length of the effect, the offset, which is the base value, the scale, which is the high value, or how far off the offset that it goes. Stagger, which is how much delay you're going to have as it processes from one channel to the next. And cluster, which is a new parameter that we've added not long ago, which will determine how many channels are moving together or sort of bunched together. Those are on your encoders so that you can manipulate them from the encoders. The cluster is on your level wheel at the very top, so those can be edited and adjusted as needed. And here's the way that I like to work with these, and it's by far the simplest way to function, is I've got this library effect running. So if I go back to my library effect, I see a green dot for any effect that's active. And what I want to do now is make this part of my cue list. So I'm going to hit record. Actually, we've already recorded the cue that I want, which is Q1, so I'm going to update. So I'm going to do update. Notice my effect toggle is yellow, meaning that it will include this effect when I update. So here's the way it works. I've now updated, and I now have a little flag that says effect number 1. I go back to my library effect. My library effect is no longer running. So what the software has done is taken this library effect and turn it into a show effect for me. It has recorded that automatically. If I look into my effect list, I will see that here's my list of effects, and there's the one that we've just created. So here are the channels that it applies to. Here's the parameter, in this case the dimmer, and here is the profile that it uses. And then here are the other parameter information. So this is running in Q1. It took care of sort of managing it automatically for me. I know this is coming from an effect because of the gray box with the white value. And since it is only in Q1, if I hit go, it is going to fade out. And in this case, I would like those channels to go to 0, so I'll just take them to 0 and update, and that way they'll go. I'll go back to Q1, and as I hit go, they're going to fade out rather than going to full. Well, let's take another scenario. Let's take our moving lights. We're going to turn them on. We're going to go to our effect library, and we're going to do a rainbow chase. So this is going to be doing a rainbow color effect. Again, you can adjust the length, offset, scale, and stagger and cluster depending upon what you want. I'm going to cluster up to 2, and we're going to record this as a new cue. So I'm going to hit record enter. It's recorded Q9. There I have effect 2. Now, as long as I continue to bring up other channels, let the effect run, record cues, as long as that effect is still running, it's going to continue to keep that populating into the next cue. And I'm going to do this one more time. So that will continue until, and you may not have noticed, there's now a new tab in my sidebar called Cue Effects. So if I'm to the point where I'm done with that effect and I want it to stop, I can hit stop, then I can hit record, and now it goes away. And it will just crossfade out in the cue time. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. You could do the same thing with any of these types of effects. The background color changes in this window when you go to a different attribute grouping. So we have intensity, the green is position, red is color, then we have zoom and iris. So all of that is there and available. Why don't we open it up for questions? Oh, I think Edward found the thing that I was looking for, which would be update 6. That's right, it's in tracking mode. Thank you. Sometimes I forget where that is. So update Q6 tracks scenes, so that means any change I make is going to start in Q6. It knows it's at scene 2, and it's going to update all of the cues of that particular scene. But it was in tracking mode. That's what I'd forgotten. So thanks for that, Mr. Smith. Okay, Robert got it to work on the command line. That's great. One question, is there any way to see windows that haven't been closed? The way to do that is to just reopen the window, and that's going to come up wherever it was, and uh, and then to close it back down again. I mean, you can do Alt Tab, which is going to show multiple applications that are running, but that's only really going to help if you've got additional applications running, not just the Neo software and Neo Windows. Another question, is there a PDF of the shortcuts? Actually, I'll do you one better. There is a wonderful thing, because the whole framework of this software is that it's so open-ended. You're not limited to you're not really limited to typing pre-built commands. But under system properties, there is a tab here called special shortcuts. Special shortcuts are special commands, some of them sort of system-wide, some of them just basic commands, where you can assign them to a specific shortcut. For example, one that I used to like to use quite a bit was lamp on, lamp off, and fixture reset. So I could make that lamp on for 98, lamp off for 99, fixture reset for 100, and then when I open my shortcuts window, those have been set. This is a really great thing when you're dealing with arc-based fixtures, lamps, where you need to manage turning the lamp on, turning the lamp off, and resetting the fixture. So that's where I usually like to get them. All right, time. I want to talk about time a little bit. So we are sitting in Q12. I'm going to grab these fixtures. We're going to give them a different position. We're going to go to a different color. We're going to go to a different gobo, and we're also going to zoom all the way down. And I'm just going to store raw values in the queue, and there we are. While we're here, I'm going to take some levels down, as well as take some levels up, and we're going to update this queue. So first of all, I've got this queue as a time of 3. So the entire exchange, or the entire change to this queue, will happen in 3 seconds. If I say time 5, sorry, I need to turn that off to go to the slash, so 5/10, what that means is we're going to have all the levels going up happen in a 5 count, and all the levels going down happen in a 10 count. So I can run that. I can see all the blues are happening in 5, all the greens are happening in the 10. I've got a split slider bar on my sidebar to show that, and that's great. But let's say I want to go further with this. I want to do attribute family timing, because when these fixtures move, I want position to move in a time of 5, and I want color to snap in 0. What I'm going to do is a couple of ways of doing that. I'm just going to click on this queue number here and go into attribute family timing, and I'm going to say position, I want to be 5, color, I want to be 0. And now I have a little flag that says AFT for attribute family timing. And as I run this, I can see the color will snap in 0, and position will happen in 5, and everything else will happen in the base time of the queue. Well, let's say we want to go further. Let's say I want my color, I like that it's snapping at 0, but I want it to snap at the end of the movement, not at the beginning. So this is where I would go into attribute family timing and give color a delay of 5. And now as we go back, we can run this, we can see the pan and tilt is going to move in 5, and then at the end of it, color's going to snap in 0. So you can get very detailed per attribute family. Well, what if that's not enough? What if I want each of these individual fixtures to have their own time? Or maybe the time's fine, but I just want them to delay differently. So we're going to look at the fixtures themselves. What I'm going to do is say delay 0 through 9, because I've got 10 fixtures. And you'll see within the channel block there's a little indicator that says FT for fixture time. So I'm now going to update this queue. And now when I go back to run this, you're going to see that delay cascade across all of those fixtures. So delay fixture time is really great because you can do every fixture can have its own time in every queue. There's really no limitation for that. You can actually go deeper. I can go into the queue list, and in here I have a timing tab. So if I look at Q13 and I scroll down, you can adjust the time or delay per parameter in this timing column, or in this timing tab, or in the delay tab, either one. So you can get pretty much as detailed as you want to. So let's see, clarification here. I was wondering specifically for the keyboard shortcuts for Neo PC. It should be, you should find that information in the manual. If not, let me know, because we've been changing some of that, and the manual may need some updating to reflect that. Couple of other questions. The assign fixtures to the Grandmaster. If you're on the console, you can actually select fixtures and say record bump and press the bump button to that Grandmaster. Actually, the Grandmaster is really already there, so I would use update. Here in PC land, I would come here, I would look here, you've got your special groups, and Grandmasters are them. So if I wanted Grandmaster 1 to have 1 through 48, then I would just change it. And if I want Grandmaster 2 to have 101 through 1000, then I would just change it. And to restore it, you can just highlight that and go back to all. There were a couple more questions. Show adding a block queue again. Yep, you can. Let's say Q12 wants to be a block queue. I didn't have to go to it, but I did. I'm going to do it free flowing, so I'm going to turn off command keys, and I'm just going to say Q12 block, enter. You could also type Q, the number, let's say 11, and then you'll have a soft key where you can choose to block, smart block, or unblock. The difference between block and smart block, a block is going to put a hard instruction on everything in the queue, everything that's in patch, where a smart block only blocks intensities for that queue list, so it allows attributes to track if you believe that's a better choice for you. Let's see, it's going to have video training, block queue, thank you very much, perfect. There are many sort of short training videos. They are on YouTube. I currently have them on my channel, so you could search YouTube and Bobby Harrell. You could search in YouTube Neo training, or Neo console training, or Neo video training, and they certainly ought to show up. I hope this was useful for everybody. Thanks everybody for attending, and let me know if you have any further questions. Bye bye.